Okay, I think we're rolling. All right, good to be back, guys. Hopefully this time YouTube doesn't decide to take us down. That was a little bit irritating yesterday. If you managed to join us for the first 4 minutes, unfortunately YouTube for some reasons they decided to take the live stream down. I still haven't heard back, so fingers crossed this one does go ahead as planned. If it does cut out, and I get the same email back from YouTube, then of course I'll be following it up again, because there is hopefully I don't understand why they've decided to take us down. That was a little bit irritating yesterday. So if it does drop, then I won't bombard your emails with the postponements and all of the extra URLs. I am recording this at the same time, so if it does drop live on YouTube, fingers crossed this one does go ahead, but I'll carry on going offline and record it just as I would have done normally, and then I'll upload the video later, so you can still get the exact same lesson, but it won't be live there and then, which is a little bit annoying, but just something that we have to do until I do get feedback from YouTube as to why they might have blocked that lesson yesterday. So apologies for the inconvenience, but we will be covering the cardiovascular system in the A-level lessons. That will be tomorrow, but today, of course, is the GCSE group class, and you can see from the board we're going to finish off on our skeletal system, looking at the skeletal functions, and then we're going to move on to lever systems and the 3 different classes of lever systems, how they all work and where they are in the body. So without further ado, we will get straight into it. So skeletal functions. Obviously last week, or last lesson I should say, we were looking at the structures. Looking at the structures of the skeleton, we were looking at different bone types and how the body is sort of designed in a way that allows these joints to articulate around each other. So, a joint where 2 bones meet, articulation is how they then move with and against each other and around each other, which then leads to the overall bodily movements that we can achieve, like flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, but we'll cover those during movement analysis. The functions of the skeleton goes a little bit broader now than just the simple structural characteristics of the bones. We now start looking at their overall purpose. Okay, so not just movement, that is obviously one of them, but all of the other things the skeletal system as a whole actually achieves in the body. So everyone will have learnt 7 functions. Most people watching this and most people going into their exams can explain the functions. So to actually say how or what part of the bone actually leads to that function or purpose. And hopefully by the end we will get to sporting scenarios and we'll apply those functions into contexts such as boxing, such as long distance running, such as everything. So we'll look at all things skeletal system and sport. So spot the difference. Mario and Luigi there on the screen. I'll leave it up there for sort of 10 seconds. See if you can spot any differences. There is a reason behind this. Okay, let's have a look. Oh, or not. So we've got the L and the U on the cap. We've got Luigi's right foot, his socks. Mario, we've got his left foot on the right hand side. We do have a mushroom there. And on Luigi's chest, he is missing one of the buttons. Now the purpose of me showing that is this slide here. Try and spot the difference with the skeleton. Have a little think, 10 seconds. Where are the differences? 3 seconds. Be different in structure, shape, size, dimension, but the purposes are always the same. So it doesn't matter who you look at, which skeleton you're observing or analysing. All skeletons, all bone serve the same 7 purposes. They might look different, but the roles they serve in that person's body remain the same. And they're the 7 purposes that we're going to be looking at today. So, just to recap from last session, we did look at the 4 different types of bone and how we have long, short, irregular, and flat bones. Long being, the length dimension is the greatest. Short, we've almost got this cuboid squat where each dimension of length, width, depth are very similar. Irregular is where we have a bone shaped in a certain way to serve a certain purpose. So they're unique in their shape, dimension, size, etc. And there's a specific role that they serve, such as protection of vital organs or protection of the spinal cord if we're talking about the vertebrae. Or they might have protrusions or sort of holes or crevices in where tendons and ligaments might attach. And then flat bones, where the width is the main dimension and it's there to dissipate force and energy to protect whatever is behind them. So long, short, irregular, and flat. Overall, if we now take the descriptions to one side and we look at their main role or their main purpose, long bones, we said before how they act more as the levers. The short bones are there to sort of stay still and for other things to rotate around, but it's the long bones which are moving. So we can start to draw out from their descriptors what role or purpose the skeleton can actually start to play in everyday life. So our long bones there, we have movement. Short bones, we have stability. Irregular, we have attachment of tendons, ligaments, organs. And the flat bones, protection. So we're moving away now from describing what these bones are, and we're moving more towards, why that's relevant or why we need that inside of our body. So the 7 functions, this is them. If you do have pen and paper, this is what you need to be writing down. We have M for movement. We have A for attachment. P for protection. Another P for production. An S for storage. An S for shape. And lastly, S for support. And if you arrange them in this way, there is this word that we spell out, this acronym, not anagram, the acronym of MAPS. Okay, MAPPSSS. Movement, attachment, protection, production, storage, shape, and support. So what we're going to do now is, now that we know what they are, we're going to actually look at how the skeleton and the bone achieves these roles. Then we're going to look at how that impacts us in sport. So we'll start with the first one of movement. Well, bones act as levers. Okay, we've already said how a joint is where bones meet and then articulate around each other. Well, if we do have articulation where these bones are meeting, then obviously we're going to be able to generate movement. But what we can't do is move a bone all by itself. We need to have its, its partner in crime. It needs to have muscle attached to it. Because without the muscle attached to the bone, that bone is just going to be left there, not lifeless because it's got its own blood supply and everything inside of it, but motionless, we could say. A bone can't move without a muscle attached to it, pulling on it. Or if the bone hasn't actually got a muscle attached to it, it might be within a larger structure where a muscle is attached to a nearby bone, for example, the vertebrae, let's just say. Yes, we do have sort of internal muscles, but the main ones causing this flexion and extension of our trunk are our abdominals. So we do have the muscles there for movement, but it goes hand in hand with attachment. So the muscles are attached to the bone, which pull them, which articulate them, which move them. So first 2 purposes, movement and attachment. What roles do the skeletal system play? So attachment here, yes, we've spoken about movement, but organs as well. Okay, organs can line the inside, or they might have an insertion where it provides this hanging space. It's this frame which everything can be attached and hung and positioned on top of and around. Okay, so without the skeleton, without the skeletal system, then everything else would just fall to the floor in a bundle of flesh, flesh, blood, muscle, and, well, God knows what else. So, movement, achievable through attachment. So there we go. Without muscular attachment to bone, both the muscle and bone would be useless, as neither could achieve a movement that we see as being productive. So a muscle contracting would just contract in on itself. A bone without muscle would just sit there. So it's the combination of the two that allows us to produce, you know, the movement actions that we complete in our daily lives. Third one, protection. Bit of Captain America action here. Skeletal bone, especially our flat bones. Okay, think back to the descriptors of a flat bone. A greater width dimension. It's there to dissipate force and energy towards the side and prevent it from coming through to the other side. Just like our sternum, just like our ribs, our lungs and our heart, our major organs behind them are protected by the skeletal bone. So performers in contact sports, very important for them. I know that we looked at this in the previous lesson as well. The flat bones are there to absorb that energy, dissipate it, so that the organs behind them receive a minimal amount of that force directed towards them. So think of bones as shields. It's there on the exterior of something which requires protection. So we've got movement, attachment, protection, production. Production. Inside of our bone marrow, we are constantly producing and secreting the chemicals that lead to the production of new red blood cells and new white blood cells, both of which are make up part of the blood cocktail that runs around our body 24/7. They both serve different purposes. Red blood cells carry oxygen. That's their primary purpose, we could say, for the sake of today. And white blood cells primarily involved with combating infection and foreign bodies which might enter our body. So we've got oxygen carrying capabilities and we've got fighting off infection. Two incredibly important responsibilities or roles which our body, or jobs that our body has to complete all the time on a daily basis. So how does our skeletal system support that? Well, we're making sure that the red blood cells and the white blood cell levels stay elevated, stay high and healthy. Without them, or without the skeletal system, or a damaged and ineffective skeletal system, gradually red blood cells and white blood cell levels and counts might start to drop off, which won't be good for overall health, let alone performance in sport. So very important. Our skeletal system helps produce new blood cells, red and white. Movement, attachment, protection, production, storage, MAPPS, storage of minerals, storage of minerals, I should say. 90% of our calcium is stored in our bone. It's stored in the skeleton. Now, calcium, an essential micronutrient for so many chemical reactions inside of the body. To name a few, well, to name one, importantly, muscle contraction. Muscle contraction is so important. Calcium is so important for muscle contraction. It's not directly linked, but think of muscle cramps. If you've ever had a muscle cramp, a large contributor to that is an imbalance in micronutrients. These small chemicals and minerals and nutrients that we ingest from food and drink, that they're floating around inside of our body, aiding chemical reactions. Well, if we start to have an imbalance or a drop-off in some of these micronutrients, certain reactions can't happen as well as they could be. One of those could be linked with our muscle contractions, which is linked to calcium, which is linked to 90% storage inside of our skeletal system. So whenever our body might need some calcium, we've got the skeletal system there as the storage. Okay? So very important. Skeletal system storing minerals. MAPPS. Movement, attachment, protection, production, storage. Next one. Support. I've got this picture here of of a tent. This almost goes back to what I was saying about 15 seconds ago, more like 5 minutes ago, about the mess of the body. We would just be a pile of flesh and muscle and, well, whatever else, if we didn't have this support. If there wasn't something inside of us holding us up, keeping our shape. Our shape will be our next one that we move on to in a second. But support, it holds things up. Okay, think about that word just in any other context. If you support something, if what could you say? I don't know, a floor surface or a stage is supported by the poles underneath it. Our body is held up. Our head is held upright. Our vertebrae is held straight and aligned. If we convert this or apply this to sport, think about the different shapes and movements that are required to bear weight. Think about a rugby line out. One of the forwards on the floor who might be lifting someone else up. They've now got their own body mass and a teammate to try and support in the air, to try and keep upright, to keep safe, to keep balanced. So support is there to actually endure force, to endure different directions which are passing through the body, and the skeleton is there, steadfast, strong, making sure that everything else isn't, knocked around and goes wherever the wind takes it. So support, another big one. Shape almost goes back to or echoes what I was saying at the start with that spot the difference with the skeletons. Yes, we've all got different purposes. Sorry, we've all got the same 7 purposes: MAPPSSS, movement, attachment, production, protection, storage, support, shape. Yes, we've got those all the same, but shape could be a little bit different. So this could start to not necessarily pigeonhole, but offer someone almost a bit of advice of what sport should I go into? Am I tall? Am I a little bit broader? Have I got slightly longer arms or legs than the average person? If so, how could I use that to my advantage in a sporting context? Or someone who's taller is going to be closer to a basketball hoop. They're going to be able to catch more balls more easily during an open game compared to a shorter person. Someone with longer arms might be better at swimming or rowing because they can produce a larger range of movement in those movement actions to produce more force to hopefully move them faster so they stand more chance of winning. So that shape as a whole, sort of a whole person, a whole body. On a finer level though, we've got the shape of individual bones. And we've already spoken about flat bones and how they're very important for protection. But irregular bones, their shape is essential for their unique role. So what purpose does the skeletal system serve? It serves the purpose of being specially shaped so that it protects things at the right time, so that certain muscles can attach to it in the right way, so that joints can meet and articulate correctly, so that we can stand up straight, pain-free, and we can move friction-free. If someone suffers from the unfortunate condition of bowed legs, let's just say, we're talking to a severe degree here, but if a skeleton is shaped with curvature, then it won't be able to support as much weight or force from an upward direction because it stands. It is a higher risk of the skeleton snapping. So the shape of bones is very important, both for sport selection and general health and well-being, but also for those finer points: muscle attachment, organ attachment, protection of tiny things. In the inner ear, the intricacies of the inner ear that allow sound waves to reverberate inside so that we can hear and keep our balance. So shape, incredibly important. So I'll just put the hurdles here, not so much because hurdles relies on shape as such, but it's just a sport where someone with slightly longer legs might opt to pursue it. Just a reminder actually, if you did want the activity sheets for this, then what you can do is head over to not the YouTube page, but the PE portal, GCSE PEportal.com, or you can go to the PEtutor.com to get to this one. And then in the trial portal, functions of the skeleton, if you just click on the Word document here, that would open up as a download, and you'd be able to get the relevant activity sheets. Alternatively, the PowerPoints or the flashcards, or even these replays as well, are going to be going up on there very shortly as well. But yeah, just a reminder that you can access those activity sheets in your own time if you did want to. Right, where were we? We are on skeletal functions. Perfect. So, moving on to the last part now, application in sport. Then we're going to move on and look at the lever systems. So, movement in sport. Let's move myself here now. There we go. So, movement in sport. Well, we've already said how bones, muscle, they attach, which leads to the production of movement. Now, we've got two examples here. We've got snooker and we've got discus. Snooker, fine motor skills, fine movements. It's going to be very difficult to actually produce some of the accuracy required for this sport. Whereas discus, large-scale movements. We're producing as much force, as much momentum as we possibly can to achieve in that given sport. So the purpose of the skeleton is to allow us to move, but we almost need to train the muscles and the joints so that they can work in a way that allows us to produce the movements that we want in that sport. So just like it says there, the size, type and capabilities of the muscle determines the movement that is possible. How fast can we move? How far? What range of movement can we produce? Is it going to be a fine movement or is it going to be a gross movement? And the sporting context will determine how we control our body. But underpinning all of the sports, all of the different types of sport action, it comes back to the purpose of the skeleton. Well, it's there to be moved. We then need to train our muscles and our mind to move the skeleton how we want it to. But it doesn't take away what its purpose is of movement. Shape and attachment. Okay, we're sort of putting these into one another now, because in sport, yes, we can move a muscle, but if we can't move our body in, in a controlled way or a skillful way, then in some sports we might not be able to produce the right shapes that we need. Yes, someone might have a longer arm, a longer leg, a longer torso, whatever it might be, but the skeleton underneath everything is just a framework. Everything else is put on top of and hung off of the skeleton. So we need to be able to control and manipulate that skeleton into the shapes that we need. How do we do that? Well, we need to control the muscles. We need to make sure that they are flexible, that they are pliable, and we train our body for bone and muscle to work together so that we can produce the shapes that we need for our sports. So this example here, the gymnasts, a large part of aesthetic sports or performance sports, ice skating, dance, rhythmic gymnastics, they rely on aesthetics. They rely on things looking clean, sharp, crisp. The timing, the coordination, it all needs to be very precise. And we need to be able to have muscles attached to bones so that we move them appropriately so that we can create the right shapes. Protection. I've got footballer here, obviously chesting and controlling the ball, where obviously we've already said how the heart and the lungs reside behind the ribs and the sternum. Well, without the bones there, without the skeleton, let's say a goalkeeper's hit that ball 50, 60 yards and it's on its way down, that's going to be travelling very fast. And yes, a football isn't that heavy, but that's still going to be generating a large force, which if that hit the heart or lungs 100% full on, I wouldn't mind saying that person will die instantly because the heart would just blow up. So the bones are there, the skeleton's there wrapped around it to offer the protection. That ball's going to hit the bone, energy dissipates sideways, major organs behind are left protected. So the flat bones there in particular are there to absorb high impact. Now this could be a rugby picture. This could be a basketball picture. This could be a swimmer who is swimming towards the wall. They turn and then they tumble, turn and their feet hit the wall and they have to push off in the other direction. Well, the bones are protecting all of their blood vessels in their feet. The skeleton is there to provide everything inside of it with this layer of protection. Blood cell production. Now, this is on in the bigger picture. Obviously, a sports performer wants to train, stress their body. They want to try and increase their red blood cell count if they can. And on a shorter time frame, if someone does through contact sports, if they do start to bleed instantly, then we are going to suffer from that, short-term minor blood loss. The blood cell production from our skeletal system is going to make sure that we can recover from that ASAP. So we do have our sort of these shorter-term concepts, but the longer-term aspect of we can't perform in a sport if we're ill. So we need to have healthy, high white blood cell counts to fight foreign bodies so that we can stay healthy, so we can train every day, every week, so that we can stay at the top of our level of performance. So there are short-term and long-term sort of perspectives on this, but in both scenarios, blood cell production essential. Without the skeletal system producing new blood cells, then we're going to be left in a bit of a sticky situation. Mineral storage. So on to our S, mineral storage. The main thing that this is linked to here now is sort of the strength of the skeleton. Because if we store appropriate and high amounts of calcium inside of our bone and we uptake calcium and keep it inside of our bones, they become stronger. Okay, they become more dense. They become better equipped to deal with multi-directional forces. The skeleton becomes better at bearing weight, at dealing with dynamic sports. So if someone is trying to be agile, for example, let's say an American footballer, dodging two different ways to try and avoid a tackle, if they suddenly plant their foot and apply a force in the opposite direction, well, that's going to create this non-linear force going through the bone, a large lateral force pulling them sideways, and they're trying to go in the opposite way. Or for the tibia and fibula, which are vertical, if we've got a horizontal force travelling through it, well, the inclination is for it to snap. And if we don't have a strong bone, if we've got brittle bones, which lack storage, then that lateral force, that sideways force, could be enough to snap the bone. Go back to the protection part. If we've got a high impact sport, a contact sport, and there's a force application onto a bone and it's not strong enough to deal with it, instead of dissipating it sideways, it's just going to crack. The structure of the bone could be at risk if we don't have proper mineral storage. Impact of that, out of training, out of performances, fitness levels start to drop, demotivation, anxiety about injury. All of these negatives associated with being out of performance, let alone you not being able to perform as high in the situation that you are competing in, because your skeleton can't deal with these high impacts. You might not be willing to put yourself into a situation, let's say rugby, for example. You're not willing to put yourself into a high impact tackle because you've experienced breakages in the past and you don't trust your skeletal system to handle this impact that's about to happen. Support. Obviously, we've already said, in fact, rugby line-out, we have already said that. How the skeleton is there to hold muscles, organs, skin tissue, etc. But it could also be there to hold other people. So your skeleton needs to be healthy enough to support your own body weight, but also in scenarios where you've got excess mass, excess weight, excess force to try and cope with, your skeleton is going to be that, that last line of defense almost, that thing propping up everything else. Yes, we can be strong through our muscular system, but the muscular system works by pulling on the skeletal system. So we need to have strength in both. And there is an activity for this as well, just to sum up the skeletal functions. Obviously, we did have those. I think if we had them written down. No, if I go all the way back to the top, just so we see them one last time. There we go. Oh, one more. There we go. There was those 7 there. So maps, movement, attachment, protection, production, storage, shape, and support. We've looked at sort of what it actually means for each of these roles, and then how that can impact a sports performer as well. So I hope you're a little bit more clued up on skeletal functions. We're now going to move across onto lever systems. So bear with me. I'll just get the next PowerPoint up, and we are moving to, here we go, lever systems. Perfect, right. So lever systems, where we're starting to deal with, how the skeletal and muscular system work together in different ways to produce different types of movement. So we'll go through from this. So hopefully by the end of this, move that there, we should know the 3 different classes, 1, 2, and 3. We should be able to draw these and label them appropriately, and then hopefully some people might even be able to sort of apply lever systems to the body itself in a sporting situation and be able to talk about mechanical advantage, what it is, how we can achieve it, and what impact might it have on sport. There we go. So that's quite a nice quote that I like to start levers with. Archimedes being sort of an old school scientist, mathematician. Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world. Postulating that anything is movable, any amount of force can be generated with the correct lever system. Okay, and you've got 3 components here. Just a bit of a heads up. We've got the Earth, we've got this pole, and we've got the thing on which the pole is rotating on. So we've got the Earth, the pole, this thing where rotation is going to be happening, and we've obviously got the people as well. So hopefully by the end of this, you'll be able to actually label this diagram, not just see it as a bit of an introductory quote. So lever system, what is it? Well, it's a rigid but movable structure. Okay, rigid but movable. So the components of a lever typically are solid. Okay, they're typically hard, tough, but together they can articulate around each other to create a movement. So within sport or within anatomy, we've got bones, solid. We've got muscles, which can produce force, but where they attach to the bone, the tendon, that's fairly tough and fibrous as well. And then we've got the meeting point of bone on bone. Again, a very solid structure. So whenever we move, be it exercise, be it sport, be it walking, be it standing, doesn't really matter, be it move my arms, there's levers at play. We've just come from the skeletal lesson there, where we're talking about attachment and movement and how we can produce different actions using our skeleton in conjunction with our muscular system. Well, how do we actually, what's the secret sauce between how they actually interact? Well, it's levers. Different bones and different muscles are capable of different speeds and magnitudes of movement based on the lever system that they're in. So we're going to look at different types of levers because they're not all created equal. None of them are good or bad, but they have good situations and bad situations where you might choose to use them in real life. Obviously, with that skeleton, it's built the way that it's built, so we can't change the class of lever, but it's good to understand how they're working, how they're at work, so we can apply that to our training. So we've got scissors here, for example. Obviously, we've got that point in the middle, which isn't moving. We've got the 2 rigid parts or 2 rigid halves of the scissors, which do move, and we apply force through them. We can lever two pieces of metal together so that we can cut through paper. A wheelbarrow. We've got a wheel that stays on the floor. We've got the barrow part, we've got the bucket part, which we can load up. And then we've got the handles that we can lift in order to move stuff or to tip stuff. And we've also got a bit of a science experiment here. If you've ever got a spare 5 minutes, this is quite interesting. But it's a marshmallow catapult. So with a couple of sort of skewers, you can create this tripod, and you can generate force with. If you can see that, there's a rubber band attached to one of the that moving catapult arm. Marshmallow on the top. We pull it down, we let it go, and we can generate movement. By attaching things together, by moving them in a certain way, we can generate force to move something else. It's all about this transfer of effort in one area of the lever to create an output of effort to overcome something in another part of the lever. So for the wheelbarrow, if we apply effort to lift the handles, we can overcome the resistance that's in the barrow, in the bucket. Scissors, we apply force through the handles so that we can pinch with metal on paper to cut. We've transferred energy from fingers into the cut. So it's this transfer of force application. And if we were to simplify these onto a drawing, now I know if you haven't seen these already, they can look a bit much straight away. But this is them in picture form, in diagram form. So if we take the orange one there, the scissors, now that triangle, if you were to imagine that in the middle of a seesaw, or that center point on the seesaw isn't actually moving. It's the pivot. It's where the rotation is actually happening. And if we think about the scissors, at that central point, there isn't movement happening. It's the rotation point. On the second one across, if we take that triangle again, okay, that pivot point, or if that's the point that wasn't moving or isn't moving, if we have a look at the wheelbarrow, it's not the wheel on the wheelbarrow isn't moving either. So in our levers, we've got an axis, a point of rotation, a pivot point, axis, pivot, rotation. And then in that blue example, where we've got that square at one end, we've got the point of rotation at the other, and we've got this catapult action. 3 different types of lever, 3 different ways that structures can move around each other. We can apply a force to a structure to generate an outcome. So the first thing that we have is a lever. Okay, the lever. This is this rigid bar or structure or an arm. It's rigid and it's fixed to, now that word there, fulcrum, we'll cover it in a second, but that's our pivot point. So the triangle in this diagram, that's the pivot. That's where rotation is occurring. The lever is that darker orange bar. So the lever sits on top of something which it can pivot around. Now it might sit on top at one of the ends and it rotates around it like that. That's what makes different levers different. So we have a lever, we have a fulcrum, which is that pivot point. We have effort, which is production of energy or the release of energy into the structure or the lever system itself. And then we have the load or the resistance that we're working against. So if we take this example here, the one just above the green box, we've got that pivot point with the lever sitting on top, so this seesaw action. But if we were to apply effort and pull one end down, it's going to rotate around the pivot and it's going to cause this up force or this uplift on the box which is on the left-hand side, which is currently weighing down because of gravity, hence the downward arrow. We've got a load or a box or a piece of resistance with gravity's pulling it down. We've got the arm or the lever that it's sitting on top of. We've got the effort that we pull down on, and with that fulcrum in the middle, we generate that seesaw catapult action. So a downward force one end, can transfer into an upward force at the other. So we've got the lever, the fulcrum, effort, and then the load or resistance. Now I'm going to be keeping those, what's the phrase? Those diagrams, those shapes, let's say, they're going to stay consistent. Okay, so just have a little look now and remember those. Lever, fulcrum is the triangle, effort is that downward arrow or upward arrow. Okay, effort could be down or up. It just depends on how you draw and how the lever is set up. But effort is a standalone arrow, and then the load or resistance is typically drawn as a box with a downward arrow. So here's one in diagram action. Everything that we've just spoken about. So the person on the right hand side, they are applying downwards effort, hence the arrow is going down. We've got the pivot or the fulcrum underneath this plank, underneath this lever. And by pushing down at one end, the pivot is going to sit in the middle, and that's going to allow us this downward action at one end from the person. We push it down, and it's going to lift the other end of the plank up and overcome the load which is sitting on the other end of the plank. Okay, this here is how you'll need to draw, or not this exactly, more like the orange one at the top there, but this is how you'll need to draw your lever diagrams in your exam. Line, triangle, effort arrow, load box, and the load arrow. And you need to make sure that the arrows, and you need to make sure it makes sense, basically. Is your effort arrow pointing in the way that's going to move the lever to actually overcome the box? So it wouldn't make sense here for this person to lift up. Because if that person lifts up, well, that's going to lift it's going to rotate the lever the other way, and it's not going to work. So we need to make sure that we draw it in the right places. But this person could choose to move this plank, to move the pivot, to move the box, to move themselves, and create a new lever system. So they're not all the same. So let's have a look at how this person could have changed it up. Well, in that middle option there, if they wanted to lift this box, then they could have set the pivot up, or this lever up, by having the fulcrum at the other end and the box in the middle, and then he's lifting from the other end. He could have stood in the middle with the pivot behind him. He could pull on that plank of wood and try and lift the box, which is at the other end. So all three of these could have happened, but they've decided to go for the one at the top. Now try and put yourself in this situation. I'm wondering now, if you imagine yourself doing this, which one do you think would be the easiest? If you need to lift, what's that, times 250. Let's say this was 200 kilograms. That's about just under 3 of me. That's a lot. That's quite a lot of weight. So do you think you could lift 3 people using option 2 or option 3? You might be thinking yes or no. Hopefully you're thinking it's going to be harder with option 2 and option 3, but you might not understand why. That's what we're going to be covering today. So a lever system is this transfer of force and effort in one direction to generate the output of force at another part of the lever system to overcome a resistance, to overcome an effort, to overcome a load, I should say. So the person pushes down in that first option to be able to lift the box up. 1, 2, 3, option 1, 2, and 3. Like we just said, some of them are going to be easier, some of them are going to be harder. None of them are necessarily good or bad, but they might suit different situations because they have different characteristics. So, labeling a linear version of a lever system. Well, we have, I've already said, 3 systems. We have a first-class system, we have a second-class lever system, and a third-class lever system. Easiest way to remember which one is which, either when you're looking at it, or you have to draw it, or whatever it is, FLE 1, 2, 3. I'm even going to put that behind me just so it's always there. FLE 1, 2, 3. Now you might have noticed FLE refers to our definitions: fulcrum, lever or load, effort. So fulcrum, load and effort. Fulcrum, load and effort. Whichever component is in the middle of the lever system, that corresponds to the letter. So FLE, 1, 2, 3. When the fulcrum is in the middle, it's a first class lever. When the load is in the middle, it's a second class lever. When the effort is in the middle, it's a third class lever. So straight off the bat, let's look here. On that option 1, the pivot or the fulcrum. Fulcrum's in the middle. FLE, 1, 2, 3. F1, that will be a first class lever system. Then we changed it around. Option 2, where the load was in the middle. FLE, 1, 2, 3. If the load's in the middle, it's number 2. It's a second class lever system. Different to the first one. Different benefits, different drawbacks. And then the third one, FLE, 1, 2, 3. Effort is now in the middle. The person pulling on the plank is now applying the effort in the middle of this whole structure. So definitely the best way to remember. FLE, 1, 2, 3. And there we have them in diagram format. So first class, where we have that fulcrum in the middle, if we pull down, that allows us to catapult upwards and overcome the resistance at the end. Second class, FLE, 1, 2, 3. So the load is in the middle, sitting on this plank, and it's weighing it down. Fulcrum and effort can be either way round. Doesn't matter, because we're pulling on one end and we're gradually lifting up, almost like hinging it up. And then third class, FLE, 1, 2, 3. The effort is now in the middle. So that's our lever. The effort is pulling from the middle upwards. Let's say the elbow is the fulcrum at one end. We pull and we lift up. We lift up, and the resistance or load is going to be in my hand. Now, how are they different? I know that if we move things around, and I said there's benefits and drawbacks. Well, the key thing that you'll need to know for your exam is all to do with this mechanical advantage. What is it? How do we calculate it? Why does it matter? Well, it's down to these two things: the effort arm and the resistance arm. Now, the effort arm is the distance from wherever the effort is applied on the lever. It's the distance from that point to the fulcrum, to the pivot. And the resistance arm is from wherever the load starts, the center of mass of the load of the resistance, the distance from that to the fulcrum or the pivot point. So what you can see here is in this lever system, FLE, 1, 2, 3, F, fulcrum is in the middle, therefore this is a first class lever system. We've got a large effort arm and a short resistance arm. Okay, they're unequal. They're unequal. Now this is good for us. This is good. I'll tell you why. Oh, where do we go now? Well, I'll tell you why it's good in a moment. But just so you can see sort of how this mechanical advantage can differ between classes, we'll look at this slide here. So if I quickly jump out, slide, where do we get to? There we go. Right. So as the fulcrum moves, so fulcrum here is in the middle, first class lever. Well, if we were to move the fulcrum sideways, to a different point on the lever, suddenly the effort arm is shorter and the resistance arm is longer. That's going to change how this lever system works. Imagine if this was a seesaw in a park or something. If one person sits at this end and another person sits at the other end, how would moving the middle of the seesaw affect the weight balance? How would it affect how easy it is to go up and down? Would it still be balanced? What if you weighed differently to the person on the other end? Well, by moving the fulcrum, we start to move the effort arm and the resistance arm, the length or the distance from the resistance to the fulcrum and from the effort to the fulcrum. Second class lever, FLE 123 load is now in the middle. So if we were to move the load, suddenly that resistance arm is getting longer and our effort arm will have been reduced just by moving where that load sits. So if we had this person applying effort at one end and they're trying to lift that plank upwards, the effort arm is going to increase if we were to move the load nearer to the fulcrum. So the effort arm and the resistance arm, okay, it's the distance of those two components from the fulcrum. Third class lever, same again. This was our third option from that person trying to move the box. A person sat in the middle applies effort upwards, and the load is at the end. Well, if that person was to stand really close to the fulcrum, if that person is standing really close to the fulcrum, then it's going to generate a different sort of lever system. It's going to generate a different structure. We're going to have to change the forces in to get different forces out. Okay. So, mechanical advantage. What is a mechanical advantage? Well, we know effort arm and resistance arms can change from one lever to another. Well, if we can create a scenario where we are mechanically advantaged, then we're going to be able to move or get a bigger output from whatever it was that we put in. So it describes a lever which can move a larger load than the size of the effort applied. So if we go back to that person trying to move the box, because of the way that they set their lever up, so if I quickly jump into this one, this person, or option one, they put that fulcrum really close to the load, to the box, creating a really short resistance arm. And that left them this long space, this large effort arm, spin around, this large effort arm on it, doesn't even go down, which we can then apply force through and move that box. Now, that box I think was 250 kilos, 250 kilograms. Now that person pushing down with two hands, they're probably not, well, they won't be needing to generate 250 kilograms worth of push force to move that box because of the way the lever is set up, because of the distance of the effort arms and the resistance arms. If we were to move FLE 123, if we were to move this or change the shape of this second class lever system, even if the load was all the way up the other end of the plank and we applied a force upwards, well, we still got a bigger effort arm than we have the resistance arm. So we're still going to be able to move more weight than we actually need to apply force into the lever with. And that's what mechanical advantage is. If we can use the structure to our benefit, if we can put force in and whatever that force is, move more or overcome a greater resistance because of the way the lever system is set up, it's mechanically advantaged. If it's the other way, it's mechanically disadvantaged. I'll jump back in. Right, so how can we link levers into sport? Well, before we go there, how do we work out what the specific mechanical advantage is? Well, we know it's to do with effort arm and resistance arm, We know it's to do with if it's to do with it being close or more than or less than. Well, if we divide effort arm by resistance arm, we're looking for a score of greater than 1. So right now, if we take this as the example, onto this page here. At the moment, let's just say we've got this lever system. Okay, let's apply this to the body. Let's say that this is 6 centimeters. So it's FLE 1, 2, 3. Fulcrum is in the middle. Therefore, it's a first-class lever system. This could be our head. Okay, where the spine meets our cranium. Okay, that's where the pivot point is, and it can rock forwards and backwards like a seesaw. So it's about 6 centimeters. Well, if someone was shaped a little bit differently, and the pivot point was here, well, suddenly their effort arm is very short. The muscles that they're contracting they're going to have to work harder to overcome not a lot of weight. Effort arm divided by resistance arm. So if we were to do 1 divided by 5, it's at 0.2. So it's nowhere near 1, therefore we're quite mechanically disadvantaged. If we were to slide it back, and it was balanced, about 3 centimeters either side, 3 divided by 3, 1. So whatever force we put in, that's the exact amount of output or resistance we can overcome. Input, output are matched, they're equal. However, if we were to increase it now, whereby we've got 5 centimeter of effort arm, and we've only got 1 centimeter of resistance arm, 5 divided by 1 equals 5. That's much greater than 1. We're mechanically advantaged by 5 times. So we can put in a force of 10, and we can overcome a resistance of 50, roughly speaking. Okay, numbers aren't always going to be exact like that, but it just gives you an idea of how we can gear lever systems to help us. Now, what's the benefit of that to sport? Well, if we're mechanically advantaged, we don't need a big muscle to produce a big output. So a smaller muscle can generate a large amount of force to create a sporting action. For example, in our feet, which I'm going to get to in a moment. So how do we calculate mechanical advantage? Effort arm divided by resistance arm. We're looking for 1, but greater than 1 is mechanical advantage. We don't need to put in as much effort to move more force or to overcome more resistance. So a score greater than 1 makes the lever system mechanically advantaged, and it will mean that a smaller muscle can move a larger mass, and that's what I said there, the foot or the ankle. So levers in the body, last part, levers in the body. Well, how do we correlate a lever system to the human body? Bone, joints, muscles, objects. Bones, they're the rigid levers. Fulcrums, that's the joint, that's the pivot point. That's where bones articulate against and around each other. The effort, that's produced by the muscles. So muscles pull the lever, they pull the bone. The bone rotates around another bone at a joint or the fulcrum. Why do we do that? Well, it's probably going to be because we need to overcome a resistance. Just me here standing onto my tiptoes and back down, I need to overcome the resistance of my body mass being pulled downwards by gravity, my weight. So I have to overcome that resistance using a lever system, by using a muscle to pull on a bone to rotate or to pivot so that I can generate a movement. So the first class lever systems, 1, 2, 3. First class lever systems, FLE 1, 2, 3. So fulcrum in the middle is a tricep extension. So in the elbow, okay, we're talking about here now. So in the elbow, as the tricep pulls down, so this tricep contracts, it pulls on the lever, which is my radius. So that's my lever, and the tricep is pulling on the bone. Now I know the tricep's down here, but the effort point, so where you would draw the arrow from, is where the muscle attaches or inserts. Think back to last lesson, where the muscle inserts onto the bone and where it pulls from, that's the effort. So that's going to be at the very end of the radius. Okay. Now the pivot point is a little bit inwards, where the radius meets the top of the base, I should say, of the humerus. So we've got radius coming across, the humerus coming up, almost making like a T. Now this radius sits on top of the humerus, so it can then be pulled down and it extends. First class lever system. So an elbow extension of the tricep pulls on the radius pivots on top of the humerus or the fulcrum, and the hand is able to move upwards. Now whatever you put in the hand is then the resistance. In sport, basketball free throw. Basketball is the load, tricep contracts and it pulls this radius up, and we overcome the load or resistance at the right amount so the ball travels towards the hoop. Second class lever, FLE 1, 2, 3. L2 is in the middle. So the load is in the middle, fulcrum and effort at the other two ends. Just like in our foot. Have a look there, look at the foot. So where we stand, okay, the ball of our foot, where it meets the floor and is going to allow that rotation, that's going to be our fulcrum, our pivot point. Our gastrocnemius, our calf muscle. Yes, it's located up towards the back of our knee, but the tendon where it attaches onto the foot, the heel bone, is right at the end again. So we've got fulcrum one end, tendon attachment or insertion at the other end, and that's the length of our foot. That's our lever. So all of the bones in the foot make up this rigid structure, this lever. All of our body weight is being experienced through the center of the foot. So the load is coming down through the center of the foot. There it is. Fulcrum at one end by our balls of our feet. Gastrocnemius at the other end pulls up, and we've got this tipping action. And as we do that, the ankle joint articulates, and it has that net effect of us going up. Second class lever, gastrocnemius at one end pulling up at the very end of the lever system, our body mass in the middle, and then the ball of our foot acting as the fulcrum. So plantar flexion, going onto our tiptoes. Gastrocnemius pulls, that's the effort. The rigid foot, that's the lever. The fulcrum is where the ball of the foot meets the floor, and then the gravity acting on the person's mass, creating that weight, is coming down through the center of the foot. Just like in takeoff. This could be triple jump, long jump, jumping to receive a rebound in netball, anything. Okay, whenever we're plantar flexing, we're applying force through the ball of our feet to try and move ourselves forward. Third class lever, third and final one. We're now dealing with the bicep. Okay, the bicep, now you might be thinking, especially if the position is here, the bicep is behind the elbow joint. So surely it's at that end of the lever system. FLE 1, 2, 3. Surely effort is a third class lever, so it's going to be in the middle. But it is, because the bicep tendon goes across the joint and it inserts around here. So now we've got the bones meeting, the fulcrum, effort in the middle, load at the end. F-E-L. E is in the middle, therefore it's the third class lever. That's where the tendon attaches onto the lever that's moving. So the bicep, that's producing the force per contraction, that's the effort. The radius bone is the lever. So the radius here getting pulled upwards. It's rotating around the base of the humerus, which is coming down here. Humerus meets radius, so that's our pivot point. And then our load is whatever we put into our hand. Where do we use this? Anytime that we flex our elbow. So it could be rowing. It could be swimming when we pull through. It could be tug of war. It could be golf where we go from our starting position, we flex up, we push through with tricep extension, and then we flex again. So, to summarize, to bring all of this back around together, we've got three classes of lever system. 1, 2, 3. That thing down in the bottom right corner there, FLE 1, 2, 3. The middle component tells you what class it is. That's the secret formula. Just remember that. FLE 1, 2, 3. Whatever it is is in the middle. That's what lever system it is. And then mechanical advantage, we require the effort arm and the resistance arm. We divide the effort by the resistance, and if we're mechanically advantaged, that will give us a score of greater than 1. And what that means is that we don't have to put in as much effort to move more weight. So less force in gets a greater amount of force out. Mechanically disadvantaged, we have to put more force in to what we can overcome. Okay, and that is mechanical disadvantage, and that is that. So thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you found that useful. Obviously, we are running these as much as we can. Hopefully, YouTube has let that run the whole time. If it didn't, then obviously you haven't seen this yet, but you've now watched it on replay or catch up, which is going to be the way forward now. We'll try to go live, but if it doesn't work, then I will record it anyway and then upload it at a later time, and then still share the links anyway. So I've been Johnny. This has been Group Classes Live, and yeah, I hope to see you again soon. All the best.